while we're waiting on Adrian coming in, we had a few questions in the presentation which we will begin to go through. So first of all, for you, Bruce, any update on how abattoirs are managing with current COVID restrictions, and is there enough capacity there to cope with demand?
So hopefully you can all hear me. So since the beginning of March, QMS have been constantly in touch with all elements of the red meat supply sector, from slaughterhouses to butchers to primary producers. We've been working with them to ensure that we could maintain that capacity, that we could maintain the throughput through abattoirs and processors, and to really help ensure that processors and food processing businesses are able to follow the guidelines as best as possible. For the most part, we've managed that fairly well, I think, and the rest of the sector has been hugely supportive in that. Obviously, there was one outbreak at a processor in the north that you'll be aware of. That was a good example of how procedure was followed very well, guidelines were stuck to very well, and QMS worked with the processor and FSS to bring it under control as quickly as it did, and that's really testament to the procedures that have been put in place throughout this year. Obviously, it's a very challenging year, and we have to take each case as it comes, but it's worth mentioning and reiterating again that the processing sector has coped remarkably well when compared to some other countries.
Thanks very much, Bruce. And another question that we have had is, could I ask if the Europe grid system is the way speakers see product being classified going forward, and is it missing the eating quality which was highlighted by Rod Polkinghorne?
So in the meantime, before I suggest that's maybe a question for Adrian, I'll have a stab at it though, and be as diplomatic as I can be. Yes, that is the current framework. I think it has to be the framework for now. Certainly no one's got an appetite to go changing anything too major this year in light of how this year's gone and what political developments are on the horizon. Certainly in the future, I'm sure that the system will evolve to suit the market and to suit the consumer. And as we know, the consumer is becoming a lot more discerning, buying slightly less red meat, but slightly higher quality in cuts, and demanding more from the product they buy. Whether or not eating quality becomes a main factor in it, and we know that some countries in South America and in Australia, there's a reference to Rod Polkinghorne there. We know that there is eating quality work out there. It could be replicated. We could learn from it. We could build on it. It's certainly something QMS are constantly looking at. One other thing worth mentioning, and I know Adrian regularly brings this up, is that eating quality is one thing, but how it's cooked is a completely different thing. And a lot of the eating quality is dependent on how it's cooked or not cooked. But as I say, I suggest that's maybe a question for Adrian to answer with a bit more technical expertise than I've got.
Thanks, Bruce, again. Adrian is just trying to join, so hopefully he will be with us soon. And a lot of the questions are best answered by Adrian, I would suggest, in terms of hitting carcass specs, seeing as he is the expert in classifying. So we have another question coming in the chat, and it's about, again, hitting carcass specs. So I'm going to suggest that we save that for Adrian again. But as Ian McDougall has placed in the chat, I'm interested in the percentage of lambs hitting supermarket or export stated at 60%. What would that percentage become if included 3Hs? My own situation is I will always accept a proportion of 3Hs to get the average weight up and a higher overall carcass return. The current reward penalty structure from plants does not encourage moving to the 100% in spec due to the loss of weight. Does this mean the current grading rates are acceptable to plants? So I suppose there, Ian, you're talking about taking the lamb or the cattle beast all the way to the absolute maximum dead weight you're going to get paid for. And when you're looking at an animal, every animal grows differently. So some are going to come fatter at a lower weight, and some are going to stay leaner throughout and need to put on the extra weight. So it's about your market and what your market specifically demands, whether that's you putting them through a live ring, putting them to an export abattoir, or putting them to a butcher. So I think what we would encourage is strong communication to your end market, which will be the processor or the auction ring, and seeing what they want, and then it follows on for them. They go to then to their supermarket or their butcher, who demands specific sizes, cuts, fat depth. For example, butchers will be quite happy to take extra fat, as the fat keeps the meat cured for that bit longer and increases the shelf life. So they'll be happy to take maybe your 3/8 as you're describing there. However, we have to also consider fat as a bit of a waste product. If there's too much fat, they're going to have to do a lot more extra butchery work, and a lot more waste then comes off that carcass. So that's another thing that we need to consider when we're looking at the price points on the Europe grid. If you've got any more questions just now, feel free to put them in the chat. We are going to try and get Adrian in so that he can give a good in-depth answer on these carcass specifications.
I think that comment that's just appeared in the chat there is exactly what we've been thinking of. This ability to hit spec, or this need to hit spec, is exactly why we developed the tool, and why we're aiming to develop further tools to reinforce the knowledge base that farmers operate on, and really to give you a resource that you can refer back to regularly. I compared this recently, the Meet the Grade resource, to something as simple as the guide to sheep diseases and sheep lameness that QMS produced a short while ago. It's a pocketbook you'll keep in your pocket and refer to back when you're on the farm. The only difference is that this will be something that you'll keep on your iPhone or your tablet and refer back to when drawing animals.
Adrian has joined the session, so we'll just get him to pop his, get him set up on his microphone and camera so we can see him. In the meantime, a question from Robert Fleming: where are 2020 Scotch beef and lamb exports compared with 2019 in terms of volume and value?
So that's not really a question that I can answer accurately. But I'm quite happy to get back to you, or to go to the proper authorities and the economic services team to get back to you on that, Robert.
Adrian, while we have you here, a couple of questions that came out of the presentation, first of all, for you. Firstly, why is there not one single industry standard for dressing specification?
Cracking question. It's the different dressing specifications were brought in to make it easier to process the carcasses. When you have the more traditional butcher shop type abattoir doing low numbers, they like things like the cod and udder fat, crown fat, bed fat, brisket fat, and they leave a thin skirt in because it helps prolong the life of the meat if they're hanging. Whereas the bigger abattoirs, which are doing 400 a day, they take it out because it's far easier to remove that product when it's hot than when it's cold. If you can imagine trimming 800 sides a day of cold fat with a knife, the knife will become blunt and you just won't get it off very easily. So the different dressing specifications were brought in so the processors could actually take the parts that they don't require, the fat parts, off when they're hot, and it's far easier to do it when the carcass is still warm rather than been chilled down 24, 48 hours. Hopefully
Thanks,
that answers your question.
Yep, thanks very much, Adrian. Secondly, could I ask if the Europe grid system is the way speakers see product being classified going forward, and is it missing the eating quality, which was highlighted by Rod Polkinghorne?
I think we are, technology is coming more and more into it, and it does need to. The classification is the Europe grid is a universal tool that's used throughout Europe, basically. It was devised by MLC in the early 70s and got adopted by the EU. I think there'll still be a necessity because everybody's used it for so long, but certainly other things, technology will come in to help with classification. As for eating quality, the question is, what is eating quality? Because is it tenderness? Is it taste? You know, marbling of when you cut between a forequarter and a hindquarter. So what is eating quality? Everybody's eating quality is different to everybody else's. So it's very easy to label eating quality, but we need to have a definition of what the actual eating quality is.
Thanks, Adrian. We have a question from Ian McDougall in the chat as well. I'm interested in the percentage of lambs hitting supermarket or export stated at 60%. What would that percent become if I included 3Hs? My own situation is I will always accept a proportion of 3Hs to get the average weight up and a higher overall carcass return. The current reward penalty structure from plants does not encourage moving to the 100% in spec due to the loss of weight. Does this mean that the current grading rates are acceptable to plants?
To me, say, to be fair, you're never going to get 100% in spec. Simple as. The person who can actually say that, tell the difference between a 3L and a 3H 100% correctly isn't out there. It is subjective at the end of the day. There are certain abattoirs that don't punish you for providing for producing 3Hs. So it's just knowing the market where you're going to. You never get. There's never going to be 100. You're never going to get 100% in spec.
Thanks very much, Adrian. We'll stick about for a couple of minutes if anybody else has got any more questions that they would like to pop in the session. But if not, then thanks very much for listening to our webinar today. And if you have any further, want to get in touch with us further, then just pop us an email to balexander@qmscotland.co.uk. We've got another question coming in the chat here. Fat stock through marts. Can we develop a system whereby carcass info can be returned to producers from slaughterhouses, especially as we have the EID in sheep sector and it's coming in cattle sector?
Sorry, do you want that one, Bruce, or do you want me to take that?
Yeah, I mean, just on a wider point of that, it's a completely valid question. I think that one of the areas that agriculture in the UK has possibly a lot of untapped potential is in data transfer and transferring that data back from the finished product back to the primary producer, just so that there's that flow of information to make sure that we're all doing our job as effectively as we can. But it's the logistics of that and the actual procedures that we put in place to make sure that that does run smoothly. So good question. Afraid I don't have an answer.
No, I haven't got an answer. The problem is if you're buying out of a market, they'll buy a pen from here and a pen from there and a pen from there. And unless you've got a tool that actually identifies each particular ear tag when it goes up to race prior to stunning. That there are such tools, but to be fair, I don't think we're really using them at the moment.
So I think the summary there is, with EID coming into cattle, it's certainly something that will become more possible further down the line. With sheep, it's a bit more difficult because not everything has an individual ear tag when it comes to slaughter lambs.
You should be able to retrieve the information on cattle. Sheep is the problem.
We have another question come into the chat here. Will the industry need to look more flexibly at grading or payment systems, as previously mentioned, if we are entering a new world of worldwide exports, where other competitors sell their meat under different systems?
I think there will have to be payment rather than you can't change the classification grids, because an R4L is an R4L wherever it is in the, you know, an R3 is an R3 wherever it is in Europe. I think you're going to need to change the payment structure rather than, you can't change the classification.
Yeah, so the Europe grid is almost a universal description of a carcass, is once how you described it to me, Adrian.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're getting a very easy ride on the
I mean, the funny thing was, I was up in two of the plants a few weeks ago in Scotland, and I did some classification checks on our MLC guys in the plants, and I found their standard no different to what we do down in England. So it's not reassuring that, you know, I can go from England to Scotland and the classification's exactly the same, the standards are the same. So I'm quite pleased with the way it is. At least we've got conformity then, haven't we?
So anyone else that's just joining, feel free to put any questions that you have for us in the chat. We'll stick around here for another little while in case any other questions come in.
It's worth mentioning as well that this resource that we've been putting together this year is the first in a suite of resources that we're hoping will cover different aspects of the red meat production chain, and will really be a benefit to the QMS levy payers. At the moment, this resource is going to sit on the Quality Meat Scotland website and can be accessed at any time, anywhere by laptop, by iPad, by iPhone, by Android device, by tablets, anything you want. So it's really a best practice guide for the 21st century, and we're hoping to strengthen that suite of resources and information as we go on.
It's a great tool because we're able to go on to be able to go to farms and do demonstrations without cattle or sheep there. We can do demonstrations on the handling points and what we're looking for. So it's a great tool. We use it south of the border, something similar south of the border, and yeah, it's a great tool.
I would say as well, it's a living tool, in that if we have feedback from the industry, from producers that are utilizing the tool as an asset, if we get feedback saying that they would prefer something else to be added to it to complement the resource, to develop the resource further in a different direction, then we're more than happy to look at that. So please keep your feedback coming in. Get on, have a look at it, have a play with it, let us know exactly what you think about it, and all feedback is gratefully received. It's a bit of radio silence in the questions there. We must have stunned everyone.
Thanks very much, Ian, for your kind comments in the chat there as well. We really hope the tool can be utilised by everybody, and whenever you see you'd like to use it as well. I think we've got your colleague joining us, Adrian. I think, unless there's two George Allens, but very, very valid points there from George in the chat, who's saying you have to remember the Europe grid is just a description of the carcass. What might going forward is a payment on the grid, then additional payment on yield, texture and taste. In the USA, they pay on yield, texture and taste, but they have feedlots and use additives. So it's showing that different countries have different systems, but it's the right fit for our system that we need to consider.
Absolutely. Thank you, George.
So we'll stick around here until 10 past if anyone has any other questions. And other than that, we will be available to contact via emails. We've had one more question in the chat. Are you happy with the percentage of local butchers in Scotland selling Scotch beef? Is it as high as it could be? Are they all on board with QMS? I think that's a really good question, a very timely question, as the launch of our new Scotch Butchers Club, which Bruce, you could give a bit more of an insight into.
So the market development team in QMS, led by Gordon Newlands, who's widely respected in the butchers community, have been working on a rebranding and a relaunch of the Scotch Butchers Club, which is hoping to increase membership of Scotch butchers by 25%. And I think they're really on target, really quite easily on target to meet that. And what they're doing is really ensuring that butchers in Scotland and out with Scotland that sell Scotch produce are being supported as well as they can be by the wider industry and specifically by QMS as well. So ultimately, it's our goal to have 100% of butchers in Scotland signed up to the Scotch Butchers Club and have them, as you say, on board with QMS. But at the moment, things are growing well, things are looking healthy, and as we all know, butchers have handled the crisis and the different things that have been thrown at them this year remarkably well. And as QMS, we're always happy to continue to support that.
We've had a question from Robert Gilchrist in the chat here. Will the tool provide more information on the actual breakdown of the carcass? What cuts come from where, and a suggestion of the cut yields? Absolutely, Robert. We want to develop this tool as much as we can to strengthen it as the years go on. I really want to have it as a demand-driven development as well. So if there's things that, as people start to use it more and more, if they have feedback or areas that they would like to see development, then we will absolutely look to develop on them. Cuts come from where it's a good way of showing value of the carcass in different areas, particularly when you're highlighting injection sites, etc. So that is something that we will definitely look to incorporate further down the line. But as I said just now, we want people to use it and really give us as much feedback as possible and suggestions on where they would like to see it going forward. We have a question in the chat here. Is there any special privileges for butchers willing to sell Scottish meat via dedicated counters to Wales and England? I think that would be a question for our market development team, would I suggest, Bruce? So Amir, we're happy to ask that question for you and get an appropriate answer.
we just go back to dressing specifications, there will normally be a different pricing structure for the different dressing specifications. So just because an abattoir up the road's offering you 2p a kilo more, it's important to find out the reason why. Just as important question as how much per kilo you're being paid is the question of what dressing specification the plant's using. In Beth's presentation, we went through and she stated that the difference in the three different dressing specifications for male could be up to 2%, and on females 2.5% in weight loss on the different dressing specs. So it is important to understand, and I've done over 30 of these meet the market days in Scotland, and that's 30 times 10 people, 300 people, and you ask what a dressing specification is, and if I've had 4 hands up knowing what the dressing specifications are, that would be about it. So it is important to know what dressing spec the plant you send your livestock adhered to, because there could be a difference in weight, and that's why one will offer more money than the other.
I'm going to suggest that we hang around for 2 more minutes, and then if there's any more questions come in, then we shall answer them.
Also, when a bit earlier as well, Beth spoke about broken needles and a needle register. We did one of these days a couple of years ago, and we had a company that supplies steaks into restaurants, and they said that they'd had a steak get to a plate and a lady had cut into the steak and there was a needle in it, and that had gone through the whole process, but the producer had actually written on the passport broken needle and a description where it was, and he also had a broken needle register. Somehow that had got lost in the process. I mean, but the problem as well was that they were saying that the needle, being so hollow and just the tip of it had broken, didn't get picked up in the metal detectors as it went through process. And he said, we all sat there totally aghast when he said this, and he said that was the second time it had happened this year. So that's why on these meet the market days we make a point of saying about broken needles in livestock, keeping a register. Remember, when you're injecting, always inject into a low price cut rather than on the bullet putting in a rump, which is a high-end value cut. Inject into the neck. Same with lambs. The number of lambs we see with an abscess in the hind leg due to a dirty needle, when, you know, if you put it into the neck and it gets an abscess in there, it's a low value piece of meat.
I mentioned earlier that this is a live, this is a living organism, this tool, and that's certainly one of the things that we were going to highlight, and one of the things we're going to add in is links to our quality assurance standards and our policies on various different things. And obviously the needles is one key thing, because we want to avoid any possible repetition of what Adrian just mentioned. So that'll be added to the tool in due course.
That's great. So if there's another question just come in the nick of time. Can you suggest one simple thing that farmers, marts, processors and butchers each could do to help the job? I think communication has to be, know who your customer is. So that works all the way down the line, whether you're a farmer providing stock to an abattoir or a market, then your abattoir providing stock to a processor, and then you're ending up with your final customer, it really is knowing what their requirements are, and if you're going to enter into that market, aim to hit those requirements, and that ultimately will look to optimize the market. So you're not looking to maximize returns, but optimize returns. It's about finding the right margin for your system between input costs and hitting your market and the maximize returns in the best market. So I think communication has to be a huge thing for when you're looking across the whole supply chain.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, the majority of the people on this webinar today are cattle or sheep producers. I wonder how many actually follow their stock through. I'm not saying every time, but every now and again, once a year, maybe once every 18 months, contacting the abattoir and saying, I'm bringing 12 cattle in this week. Can I watch them go through the process of being classified and weighed at the scale? Just so you get a better understanding of what you're actually producing. The same with sheep. Sheep are very important. You've only got to leave them a week or so and they go from being fit to being too fat. So just follow them through, watch them go over the scale. If the abattoir will allow you, at present they probably won't because of COVID. But I really do recommend that if you get the chance, talk to your procurement, just ask them if you're able to go and watch them. You don't need to watch the whole process, just watch them be weighed and classified. And you get an understanding then, a little bit more understanding, perhaps if you're getting a few more free H's. Just handling them alive and then see them go through as a carcass form. There's nothing better, to be fair, than just to hone your skills a little bit. I'm not saying do it every week, I'm just saying once a year, once every 18 months. Just follow your livestock through.
I think it's very easy as us farmers, we send lambs or cattle beast away, and in return we get a piece of paper with a heap of grades on it, and it's trying to correlate between the animals that you sent away and the grades that you get at the end of the day. So although the meet the grade tool does look to try and do some matching up via your farm office, watching your animals go over the scale really is a beneficial thing to do, and it shows you everyone's lambs kill out differently, or everyone's cattle beasts kill out differently. You'll know your stock better than anybody else, so you'll know when you're starting to draw, you'll know which ones tend to kill out a bit heavier or which ones you can take that little bit fatter, because you know actually when it comes to killing out, they'll be okay.
It's a great thing about these meet the market days. It's a hand-on session. You get to handle the animals alive. We explain the different grades when they're alive. We handle maybe 10 sheep and 4 or 5 cattle. Then we watch them go through the process. And then at the end of the day, we go into the chiller and we've got time to discuss these carcasses of the classification. But you also get to see the whole process on these days. As we say, we've probably run 30 in Scotland over the last 4 years. Really looking forward to doing them this year, especially as they've been extended to 3 more. Unfortunately, COVID put pay to that, but hopefully this time next year we'll be back into them. And it takes half a day. It takes half a day of your time to come on one of these days. We do them all over Scotland. So just when you see the press release, book yourselves on and come. They're a good day.
Yeah, absolutely, Adrian. And we've had such high demand from them just because people want to get on these days. The feedback's really positive. It's a practical day, and it's what you make of the day as well. So you ultimately are going to handle the lambs, and then you're following them right through. So you really are seeing the whole process, and I've certainly learned a lot from the practical tips going back home then to draw stock. So I would certainly recommend them, and we are desperate to get back out when we can do safely and run these events again.
Yeah. It's not a day where we're going to tell you where to market your lambs, whether to send them live weight or dead weight. We need both. We need competition out there. We need markets as well as we need the abattoirs. As I say, it's informative and informal. And the more question we get asked during the day, the more it helps the day go along.
Unless there is any more burning questions, I'd like to bring this Q&A session to a
I think we got one more just coming, I think.
And just before you wrap up, Beth, it's worth saying that if anyone didn't manage to attend today to have a look at the demonstration of the tool, let them know, share the information, share the link to the tool that you see on the QMS social media channels, get people to get their eyes on the tool and have a play about with it. And as I said before, any feedback, more than welcome.
Yeah. Neil's just said they don't like you following through. I would have a word with your procurement team who come around to your farm and have a look at your cattle. I have a word with those. It normally does the trick, I find. Right. I put my email address in there, Neil. If you drop me an email, I'll answer you.
Okay. Thanks very much, everybody that's come along and asked questions today, and thanks for joining the webinar earlier on if you did so. Apologies for all the connection issues we've had, but we're all learning in these different times that we're living in. So we thoroughly enjoyed participating in the webinar today. Any questions, just drop us an email and we'll get back to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.